Walking along a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and... Wait, is Jesuits in space all you need for a successful book pitch? At a corner table by the fire are four people. One of them is arguing that, yes, indeed, that is all you need for a successful book pitch. And that's me, Matthew Mellema. So welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. The Anselm Society is a coalition of churches across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to one very simple mission, a renaissance of the Christian imagination. If you want to find out more about the Anselm Society, please visit us at anselmsociety.org. And while you're looking up stuff, why don't you rate and review our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Helps us out a ton, helps increase the visibility of the show, etc., etc., etc. You all know this. And I'll tell you, I know it's like part of my little spiel that I'm especially excited for this particular podcast, and that's always true. But this one is especially true because if y'all listen to my update from a couple weeks ago, and just so you know, whenever I'm following a podcast and they give me like a 3-minute update, I never listen to it. But if you did, first of all, good for you. And second of all, you know that we're doing a little format change for the better. We've had a lot of great talks with the Anselm leadership team, and we decided to make some changes, some subtle changes, but good changes to Believe to See. So one of them is that instead of posting, every 2 weeks or so, we're going to try to start posting every week. Half of those podcasts are going to be the typical interview model where, we talk to some scholars, some artists about the work they do. They'll still be great. They'll go every other week. But in between those times, we're going to have what I'm calling roundtable discussions inside the Anselm Society Digital Pub. And those roundtable discussions, as much as we can, are going to involve me and our 3 co-hosts. That's right. For those keeping track at home on your Believe to See bingo cards, we've added another co-host. Let's start with the regulars. Mandy, welcome back to the pub table.
Thank you, Matt. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Oh, that's another thing.
In person.
We're in person now. So, don't know if y'all saw this, but COVID has made in-person communication a little trickier. So we've been remote for pretty much the entire length of COVID.
Yes.
But now we have new microphones. Hopefully you can tell the difference. If you can't, it's because of user error on my part. And we're all literally at a table together.
It's not round. Sorry. I'm sorry about that.
Next time.
Okay.
We also have Evangeline Denmark. Hello, Evangeline.
Hello.
How are you doing? How do you feel about the new format?
I think this is going to be fun.
Okay. Good. If you had any other answer, I'd be really concerned at this stage, but that's great.
I have some questions.
I have some serious misgivings if you wouldn't have ignored my series of texts.
Let's just talk about them now. We'll just hash them all out.
Can we talk about this off air? And finally, our latest co-host. It's sort of like when the Green Ranger was added to the Power Rangers. Jane Charles, welcome to the podcast and welcome to the sub-guild in the Arts Guild of co-hosts.
Thank you.
And you've been on a couple podcasts in the past, but for those who may not be familiar, first of all, go listen to them. They're both very, very fun podcasts. And second, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a poet and a writer I live in Colorado Springs. I'm married and have 2 children. What else is there to say? That's it, team.
Well, how about what kind of poetry do you write?
Mostly formal. I just finished a verse play about St. Ignatius of Loyola, John Calvin, and Francois Rabelais, who all in real life attended college together in Paris. So in my play, they are celebrating Mardi Gras, and they get mixed up in a murder mystery together. So they each have a different form that they speak in for verse, and they just get into all this sorts of mischief and lots of conversations about the significance of the body and guilt and innocence and all those manner of things.
Okay, so as you all can see, she will fit right in at the Believe to See pub table. That you were doing regular updates on the play progress on Twitter, and I think I liked every single one.
Good, I'm glad.
So I have been following with interest. And yes, I'll be a beta reader if you want
great,
to.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's with an editor now, so we'll see what she says. But yeah.
Okay, twist my arm.
Rejected.
I know, it might be.
Oh, I meant he might be rejected for reading it.
No, that won't happen.
So in addition to the format changes that we just talked about, there's some other changes going on too, and that has to do with the focus of Anselm during this season. It seems to be kind of churchy language. It's not a period of time, it's a season. So during this season, we want to really focus on storytelling. So that can be on the very individual level, which is, if you're a writer, what are the aspects of, putting together a good story? Or how do you tell a good story? Just like with your mouth to people who are listening with their ears in person, the old-fashioned way. But it could also mean, the macro level, looking at viewing ourselves, especially viewing ourselves as Christians, as part of the bigger story of the cosmos, of situating ourselves within the story of the church, the Christian story, the story of redemption, all of this. So it all kind of comes in this umbrella. The umbrella is very broad, but potentially deep. Does that make any sense? The umbrella analogy? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I can see Evangeline sort of looking like, no, it doesn't. I'll be polite. See, I never would have picked that up when we were doing remotes, so this is helpful.
I'm just picturing actually those umbrellas that are like a tulip that really come down. I was thinking of a deep umbrella.
Right, the ones like, especially if they're clear, you can look through them.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that what you meant?
That's exactly what I meant.
Cool.
That's what we're
I
doing.
was not having doubts. It's not critical over here.
So-
Imagining.
We have
That's
to
my imagining face.
Yeah, we have to retrain our faces.
Yes.
We've been alone in our rooms recording these in the past.
Yes.
It's true. It's true. So that is what Anselm is doing. And for those who follow Anselm in other formats, you'll probably notice this in the events we put on. It'll probably come out in our next Imagination Redeemed conference, some of the other content we put out in other formats. But it will also filter down to this podcast. Sometimes it'll be in, minor ways where we'll try to have a guest on and try to, tilt the conversation in that direction to really get to the emphasis on story. And sometimes it'll just be, we may have a series about some particular aspect of storytelling or the craft of storytelling, what makes an effective story. So this will take a whole bunch of permutations. We haven't quite figured them all out yet, but I've been doing a lot of brainstorming, and when I tell my ideas to Brian Brown, he nods his head politely. So maybe some of them will happen, who knows. But to give sort of a test run of all of this and to sort of give a brief glimpse of what we mean by the storytelling theme, I thought, given as this is the first Believe to See of the new year, that we could look back on our past year as readers, as cinema viewers, not movie watchers, cinema viewers, or anything, just the way we consume art here in the Guild, and try to pick some story, whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, whether it's something else, that really spoke to us. The story formed us in some particularly powerful way. So I thought we would each take turns, give our little spiel on this, and then we could sort of talk it out with each other and try to figure out why these particular things, these particular stories had such an impact on us in this particular past year of 2021. Okay, so one of the benefits of sort of opening this conversation is I don't have to start. But I think we can start Evangeline. So, Evangeline, what did you pick as your book / movie / whatever that had a particular impact on you this past year?
Okay, mine is the one that you referenced in our little intro, The Sparrow, which is by Mary Doria Russell. I like combined Mary and Doria and got Moria. Mary Doria Russell. So I've heard of this book, been hearing about it for a while, and I don't know. I think first I have to say that 2020 and 2021 were really hard years for me, other people as well, and I really lost the ability to lose myself in story. I just would pick up a book and try and read, and reality was just always there, too present to ignore. So for a lot of COVID season, I did very little reading, and it was terrible. But I kind of gradually got back into it, and so I read The Sparrow right before the end of year. I don't think maybe it was November, December time. And I never would have, okay, so the little tagline, Jesuits in space.
What?
Yeah. As soon as I heard that, it was like, well, I'm sold. Okay.
But see, for me, that wouldn't have sold me because I'm not, well, except for the like interest factor, the weird factor. I'm not into sci-fi. I'm not a sci-fi person.
But is Jesuits in Space really
It
sci-fi,
is
or is it
not.
just sort of what's going to happen?
And I think that's the whole point. You know, if
Destiny.
it's like
Destiny.
there's so much less about spaceships and tech than there is about characters. And so that was, I think, what connected me and what got me going. So this is, I just briefly, intelligent life is detected in the universe, and it's ironically this group of people who are, well, they're just friends basically, but a Jesuit priest is one of them, and so the Jesuits are the ones that obviously are the first to want to go and reach them for Christ, but also really to see what God has done there. I mean, they really have an open attitude towards it. And so they put together this, team, and they travel to this, what is Alpha Centauri, I think?
I think so, yeah.
To encounter these aliens. And even saying aliens to me is like, oh, like normal me would just be like, okay,
Right.
aliens.
Whatever.
But the emphasis is just never on that. And I don't mean to like offend sci-fi readers. It's, it's to each their own. But it's never about that. It's about the characters. It's about this priest, Emilio Sandoz. It's about his particular journey to find God. And it connects with suffering, which I think was needed coming out of these last 2 years. So that's how I ended up reading a book about Jesuits in space. And why I wouldn't even say that I enjoyed it, because that's not the right word.
It's not an enjoyable book.
It's not an enjoy.
No.
It's challenging,
Yeah.
and it met me, if that makes sense. And so it made an impact, and that's my little spiel.
Okay, so on behalf of the sci-fi nerds, I'm curious because this has been at or near the top of my to-read list for a while. I haven't read it for whatever reason.
The Sparrow?
Yet. Yes.
Nice, okay.
But let's just get this out of the way so my fellow sci-fi nerds can get it. How much detail do they go? Like, do they make it like hard sci-fi? Like, here's the aliens, here's what they look like, here's how they live? Or is it all like, that's not the point, guys?
I would say like the detail that's given about the aliens is all what you would encounter in an anthropological study.
Oh, okay.
Even when they first meet, it's not this shocking, they're so different. In fact, it's more about these are the ways that they are similar. So, you're kind of preparing for the green men or whatever, like you would see in a sci-fi, the weirdness. And that aspect is not readily apparent. The tech is interesting, but not detailed. Like the way that they get there, they take an asteroid there.
Oh,
Which is awesome.
It's awesome.
Very cool.
It's very cool. But, as far as like how that works, I don't know. And I don't care. Sorry, what were you going to ask
so
me?
is the fact that the aliens are not strange, does that strike the Jesuits? Are they expecting the green man or the single-eyed, multi-tentacled creature?
I don't remember a lot of anticipation of that.
Okay.
And in fact, it's very beautiful the moment that Sandoz is kind of the first, because he's gifted in language, the first to connect, to communicate with the alien race. And it's quite beautiful and moving. And in fact, there's, these discussions about he seems to be in line to be sainted.
Oh, okay.
And so there's just this thread of him becoming more and more, is exalted the right word? Or,
Sure.
closer and closer
Just holier.
to, yes.
Yeah.
And then, it's so brutal.
Yeah.
But no,
See, now I want to read it because you said brutal.
It's
That's
brutal.
my jam.
It's brutal.
absolutely brutal. But yeah,
It's gut-wrenching.
I'm all about gut-wrenching. Be quiet, Matt.
Yeah, the ways in which they are the same is highlighted, and I think gradually the layers of how they are different are peeled away.
Well, can you tell us about how they first discover the intelligent life? Because I think that's important.
Oh, yes, I had forgotten about that. They detect music,
Yeah.
singing, singing.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they figure out that this is a broadcast of singing from
Extraterrestrial.
yes,
Right, not from Earth.
right. And then and so they're like, we have to go and meet the singers. They're going to meet the singers, and the first individuals that they encounter are actually not the singers.
Yeah.
And the singers who create this beautiful sound are more brutal than the first race.
Oh,
So-
wow.
Yeah. At least when I read it, it does a great job of preparing you with expectations and then just like at every turn sabotaging your expectations so that you feel like you're on an alien planet where things look roughly the same. You know, grass grows from the ground upwards. You've got that. But you really can't hold on to a lot of your expectations, especially morally. And it's just is destabilizing. But one thing I remember, science-y wise, for hard science, they play with time so well.
Yes, they do.
That was something that really stuck with me about it. You could talk about it because it's your book.
No, actually, you probably would do a better
okay.
job because, yeah.
It just, the author so carefully charts out, okay, well, she understands that there's no such thing as, you know, a universal moment. So it's not like this moment now, here, there is no corresponding moment anywhere else in the universe because time is just a series of cones that kind of fit together. So you can't say right now on Mars because there is no right now on Mars. This moment on Mars, it's a different length of time. It doesn't correspond in any
Like
way.
Narnia.
Very much like Narnia.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's no correspondence between here and anywhere else in the universe except by ratios. So she does a great job of leaning into that and really sticking with it, and it becomes a plot point how time is passing. Everyone's having the same experience of time, but their experience is misleading because time is passing so differently and there's no way to map those experiences onto each other from planet to spaceship to Earth.
Wow.
So it becomes this plot element of, well, what's happening when? Well, you can't say when because there is really no when. It just is really, but she does a good job of doing it without it being confusing.
And she tells the story from different
Yes.
time points very effectively. Sometimes that's so irritating
Yes.
to be thrown back or, you know, whatever, but she makes good use of it.
Yeah.
So it's not a linear narrative.
No.
Okay.
No.
But is anything linear? No.
Mind blown.
So one of the things I like about, there's sort of this subgenre in a lot of alien stories, because in the popular pop science imagination, you know, that like following H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, where it's always the aliens they're always super smart, and because they're super smart, they are hyper logical and therefore brutal, and they will wipe out the humans, and they don't have feelings because aliens smart. Okay. But a lot of certain works of art will sort of flip that on its head, and I always find it really interesting when it does that. So there's, I know, a really obvious example would be Out of the Silent Planet, like the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. Something else would be, in some respects, some elements of the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Super good. Have you guys read that one yet?
I haven't read those.
I haven't, but I recently, within the last 5 years or so, started reading Ray Bradbury. And I mean, he is my kind of
Well, if you like what he writes about Earth, just think what he writes about Martians.
I have read a short story by him, The Man or something.
Is it on Mars?
I think so. It's not on Earth. It's not The Pedestrian, which is fantastic. I love The Pedestrian. That's on Earth. But it's one about, there's like a Christ figure on a different planet. I can't remember what it's called.
okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, the Martian Chronicles, you should read them because
Yes, sir.
it sort of gets in the same thing.
Okay.
I'll give a quick shout out and then I'll run away from this point. Avatar kind of does that too. There's a lot of things to criticize about Avatar, but that part is interesting where the humans are the bad guys. Okay, running away from the point.
My husband allowed me to not go see that with him, so.
Yeah, I've never seen it either.
It's a valid choice.
Next time you want to go to a Avatar-ish movie, just give Peter a call.
There we
We'll
go.
go. It's all good.
Yes, not for the story, but for other
For
valid
the
research
blueness.
purposes. Yes.
The visuals.
But this also came up, I think the best example, there's this book called Eifelheim, which is written by I forget his name, he's a sci-fi writer, but this was sort of a sci-fi literary thing, and the concept is so cool, where the concept is aliens come to Earth in rural Germany at the height of the Black Death. So they come to this small German village, and they interact with like the townspeople and especially the village priest, who is very well educated at the University of Paris in scholastic thinking. So there's a lot of in-depth talk between the alien and this priest about trying to incorporate the aliens like beyond 21st century knowledge of like hyperphysic dimension stuff, with the priest talking about like scholasticism, and it's fascinating, and it gets to the same point where it's making you wrestle with stuff that the War of the Worlds stuff doesn't, because War of the Worlds, the aliens are just sort of this disembodied intelligence with tentacles. You don't really wrestle with that. But when you talk about creatures on another planet, another world that may have intelligence, that may have feelings and desires like ours, that gets you to wrestle with some different situations. I'm guessing a lot of that wrestling went on in the Sparrow.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And, what really comes in is just the way that the society is set up and how that affects morality. I think Jane, you mentioned morality. And, you think, oh, no, this is wrong. This is terrible. But then you see why these decisions are being made, on the part of the aliens. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay. And then, so you have this societal, construct, and you're beginning to understand the motivations, blah, blah, blah. And then it just gets, again, you're destabilized because it just, becomes so brutal so quickly.
It just implodes.
And your eyes are opened and you see that, you thought this was this sort of rational construct, and in fact it is perhaps more of an evolutionary construct. But yeah, what was your question? I forgot.
Wrestling. It was wrestling.
They wrestling with like an alien intelligence that may have a soul that you need to deal with. They're not just like some tentacle-y monster.
Right, like Ender's Game or,
Well, what's interesting to me is the fact that in this book, it's the Jesuits who are going, and the fact that they were attracted by the music, it almost sets it up that the assumption is there is a soul. Why would the Jesuits go?
Definitely.
They wouldn't be the ones to go if it weren't a soul.
Right. And it is certainly leading in that direction, especially when they make first contact, and it's this very beautiful sort of coming together and learning about each other and all of that. And you see Sandoz increasingly saintly. And so definitely the soul is a factor.
Which for Wells, it's not, period. Not even
No,
for humans.
no, that was not.
You wouldn't expect an
That was
alien
not
to
high
have a
on
soul.
Wells' list of concerns. Yeah.
No.
All right. So, any closing comments? You talked about the Sparrow being a punch in the gut and how devastating it is. Any other things you want to encourage the people to read it?
I think sometimes we need comfort in certain ways. We've talked about in the Arts Guild about how sometimes beauty and softness and comfort is what we need. And sometimes we need comfort in kind of surprising ways. And I wouldn't have suspected that book would be comforting to me. So I definitely would recommend it with warning labels. You just need to be in the right space to read it.
All right, so that was book number 1, The Sparrow. So now let's go to work of art, notice not book, number 2. And that is Jane. Jane, what's your choice?
I picked a movie, which if anyone knows me, that's a little out of character. But I chose the film The Green Knight, which actually came out in 2020, but I didn't get around to watching it until 2021. And it's directed by David Lowry, for any film people out there. Stars Dev Patel, and it's a retelling, emphasis on retelling, of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a medieval poem by an anonymous poet. It's an Arthurian legend, and it's just magnificent. So do you want me to give a summary? How do you want me to talk about it?
Let's start with the poem, because a few years ago I was feeling especially literary, and I read the poem, and I enjoyed it, but I was also like, what?
Yeah.
So, what's your experience with the poem, and did you have a similar reaction?
Sure. Well, that's kind of my period. I work, right now I'm working on a translation from Anglo-Saxon, which is the version of English that's one step older than the Middle English of the Sir Gawain, but that's kind of my area. So I enjoy the poem. I think it's just one of the pinnacles of the Arthurian legends. It's got this great element, and I don't think this is a spoiler because you've had about 1,000 years to read it, people.
Good point.
It's got this, the whole poem is structured around games. So it's a Christmas poem. It begins at Christmas, and then it expands out over another Christmas. So it's 2 Christmases. It's bookended by Christmas. And it, within it, there's a central game, which reappears in the film. But in the poem, the game becomes a motif. And in the film, the game transforms, and it is no longer a game, which I think is a really interesting difference. So my experience of the poem is that it's one of those moments in the Arthurian legend where you see Camelot at its glory. The poem is not full of the peril of other elements of the Arthurian legend. It's this point where the world is stable under your feet. Thank you. Mandy poured me more wine. The world is stable. Christ's chosen king is on the throne in the form of Arthur, and there are still evil in the edges, but there's a sense of Christendom in the poem. So the virtues are defined. The standards are set. People know how they ought to live. Whether they do or don't is up to them, but they know what they ought to be doing. David Lowry directs A Green Knight very much for 2020, when I don't think any of us would say we know how we ought to live. And I don't think any of us would say that Christendom is still in its full flowering. So it's a very different experience. But to me, that's the experience of the poem, and it stands in sharp contrast with the film.
Okay, so for the poem, and from what I gather, I haven't seen the movie yet, based on this conversation, how this unfolds, I may or may not be asking my wife Danielle to watch it with me this weekend.
Danielle's
like
fate
there's a test
rests
here.
upon
Yeah,
this conversation.
I'm going to watch it either way, but the question is, will I have Danielle watch it with
watching
me?
it with you.
Okay. So the poem kind of defies plot summary. Like, you can give the plot summary, but it's not going to make sense. Is that the same way with the movie? Like, could you?
Yes.
No spoilers, but
It is the same way.
could you say, like?
Yes, no.
Okay. So,
I can't even tell you what happened if you gave me an hour to tell you. I couldn't actually
Okay, so this is
tell
a no
you
for Peter.
what happened. There are certain shots in the film where the film might just sort of fragment and go off into parallel universes. I'm not actually clear on whether the film takes place all within the same universe or if it's a glimpse of a life lived in multiple ways across parallel universes.
Have you watched it more than once, or do you?
I've only seen it one time.
Do you think you probably?
Oh, absolutely.
Want to watch it again?
Yeah,
Okay.
we watched it at Christmas because I convinced my husband it would be a great Christmas movie.
the green like Christmas.
It became
And then we'll watch It's a Wonderful Life.
my favorite Christmas movie.
Guys, I talked Danielle into watching Die Hard with me this Christmas.
Oh.
It was great.
How'd that go?
I loved it.
How did it go for Danielle? I'm trying to decide whether to advise her to watch
No,
Green Knight
Peter
or
and I
not.
have reached a compromise
Danielle
on Die Hard, but
watched
that's
it.
another podcast.
I wouldn't say she loved it. She watched it the way I watch White Christmas. I know I'm supposed to.
Oh, White Christmas is brilliant. We need another podcast talking about Christmas movies.
Anyway, you watch it as a dutiful spouse. You don't say anything openly hostile to it, but you wouldn't go right to enjoyment.
I'm not sure The Green Knight is her film.
Good to know.
Not convinced.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think
if
your description of this could take place in parallel universes, that is accurate.
There's a
That's
shot,
a good way to describe
and
it.
I literally can't give away plot points because I don't know what happens.
I'm not sure what the plot is.
But I can't tell you how spectacular this film is. It's gorgeous. Oh, and I should give a red flag warning. It is rated R, and very rightfully. Do not watch it with...
It deserved the R.
It really did deserve the R. There's one scene in particular that's quite sexually explicit, and it would... If you're watching it with young people, you'd have to unpack that a little bit. But there's one shot in it where the camera just goes in a 360-degree rotation, and then a 360-degree backwards rotation. It takes like 2.5 minutes. Evangeline and I are just staring at each other, like making
What
faces.
was that?
And it's magnificent. It's the kind of shot where if someone just made that shot, you would watch it in complete isolation and you would leave and say, I'm going to reconsider my existence. I'm not exaggerating here. So it's different from the poem in that way, because the poem it's not devastating in the same way, and that's because it's written for a different kind of person. It's written for a kind of person who didn't need to be shattered. Their salvation didn't require them to go through that kind of shattering experience, which David Lowry is not Christian. He was raised, I think he was baptized Catholic, raised Catholic, describes himself as an atheist or an agnostic, but once you're baptized Catholic, you're always Catholic. Can't shake that.
Graham Greene.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just trying to piece together with this storytelling theme. So this seems to almost be like an anti-story in some ways. Like you can't be like, oh, here's the inciting incident, here's the call to action, here's the rise.
You can do that.
Can you?
You can.
And if so, how does it work in this movie?
Yeah, I can tell you the inciting incident because it's super well known. Half the listeners already know this. It's the same as the one in the poem. Everyone in King Arthur's court is sitting at the round table. It's Christmas, and they're having their Christmas feast. And then suddenly, from out of nowhere, this mysterious character called the Green Knight enters the room. He crashes in, flings the door open. It's snowing outside. He comes in. He's this giant of a man. And he's dressed all in green, and his skin is emerald green. In the film, he's more like a tree, which is significant. In the poem, he's a man who happens to be green. And he's a giant. Riding a horse, he's got a huge axe. He has an axe in the poem? Does he have an axe? He has an axe. I don't remember. Yes, he has an axe in the poem. And in the film. And he comes in and he says, I have a challenge. I propose a game. And all the knights are sitting around and they say, what is this? And he says, here's my game. I challenge one of you to strike me a blow, any blow that you choose. And this time, a year from now, we will meet again and I will return the identical blow to you. So Gawain, who is King Arthur's headstrong nephew from the Orkney Islands, he's always in trouble, always up to something. He says, I'll do it. So in the film, he actually uses Excalibur, which is an interesting decision on Lowry's part. In the poem, I think he uses the Green Knight's axe, if I'm remembering correctly. And the knight tells him, you can nick me or you can chop off my head. It's your choice. And so Gawain naturally chops off the knight's head. Then there's this classic moment. It's one of the great moments of literature. And the knight, his head falls off and rolls across the floor to King Arthur's feet. And everyone thinks, and then the knight just walks over, picks up the head by its own hair, leaps onto his horse, and the eyes in the head turn and look at Gawain and say, 1 year. The Green Chapel, 1 year.
Oh my.
And he rides out of Camelot holding his head. This is a great moment. So then Gawain has a year to get ready to go find the Green Chapel and get ready to have the blow returned by the Green Knight.
Have his head chopped off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the story. And within the poem, Gawain is already a knight of the table. He's got all these virtues. He's heroic. He's noble, all these things. In the film, and I think this is a really important choice, he is not a knight. He's clearly kind of a young man who's adrift in this world where it seems like heroic deeds have been done and there isn't anything left for him. So he's not heroic. He has not been knighted yet. And it feels like someone who's attempting to be virtuous, but in a vicious age where it's not clear how to be virtuous. So I think that Lowry's remake resonates with us much more closely than the poem does because it's not clear how to be a knight today. Go ahead, Evangeline.
I was just going to ask, I have a question. This occurred to me as I was watching it. The king invites Gawain up and he says, I want to get to know you better. Tell me a story. And Gawain has no story to tell, which reminded me, I saw that as an invitation to tell stories. And since we've been talking about the importance of telling stories, especially in person, that just kind of made my brain light up. And it also reminded me of the Caveman Story, which takes place in medieval abbey, and it's at dinner time, and they're passing around the harp, and everyone is expected to offer entertainment, and Caveman is unable to. And then, he leaves, and he has this encounter with either a visitor, an angel, or whatever, and is given the gift of song. Mm-hmm. And it just reminded me of that moment. And so I wondered, right after, Gawain says, I don't have any stories, the Green Knight shows up and plunges him into story. And I'm just wondering, Jane, you would know more than I would, what the importance of that. I was thinking about that symbolically of, storytelling being a part of hospitality. I don't know if you have anything. Is that in the poem? Is he invited to tell a story and he has none?
In the poem, he has a lot of stories.
Okay.
Because he's already traveled and he's had all these adventures already. So what you're picking up on is really good. You're correct that is a decision that the writer and the director made. And I think what you're saying about storytelling as hospitality and Gawain's insufficiency is encapsulated in that moment where when he says, I have no story, what it means is I'm nothing. Yeah. I have nothing to offer. Mm-hmm. And then you're right that the Green Knight appears for him as a savior in a lot of ways because it gives him an opportunity. And in the film, he spends a lot of the next year trying to avoid that opportunity until it becomes clear to him. And it becomes clear to him that life is not worth living without having a story to tell that. And he just comes to a point where he would rather go and have his head chopped off and have a story, have an identity, have something to say, some account to give for himself, than continue the way he is. And I can't say anymore because literally the last 30 minutes of that film are so good. Yeah. I hadn't thought about the storytelling and hospitality connection and how he has nothing to offer. That's great.
All right, so thank you very much for your insight on the movie. I've decided I will not be watching this with Danielle. Danielle, if you're listening, you're welcome, and I plan on watching this next time you're out for the night. So
I want to make one more point. There are a couple of sacramental missteps that I thought really undermined the film because there's an interesting sense in which it's trying to be faithful to its era visually and thematically, but then it makes a couple of mistakes where it almost feels like maybe the writer didn't know how Catholicism works or something. So it was interesting, and I'm not going to tell you what they are because I want you to find them.
Ooh, it's a scavenger.
Okay.
It's our own story.
Okay.
There's two in particular that really struck me as that disrupts the unity of the story. This is a mistake.
Gotcha.
So think about that.
Well, I will look for them and report back to you.
Do.
All right, so now I thought about pulling the show opener's prerogative and going to Mandy, but I'll go next.
No, that's fine.
I'll go next.
That's fine. I will pour you another glass of wine while you talk.
Okay.
Tell us what the wine this is.
Oh, yes. Tell us.
Yes, it was 25% off at the liquor store because it is the Hallmark Channel special edition jingle. That's right.
That's right. Hallmark has its own wine.
Hallmark
baby.
has its own wine. Oh, Matt killed the
And
bottle.
we've had the whole bottle, people.
No, it was there was a little bit gone before.
So mine will be unsurprising for anyone connected with the Anselm world, but my choice is Pier and Easy by Suzanna Clark. And let me just say a little bit about Suzanna Clark because I just think she's the coolest. Up to this point, Pier and Easy was published, I think, late 2020. So her only previous novel was published in 2004, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and it is one of my favorite books in the entire world. It is so weird. It's 900 pages long. It has copious footnotes. The footnotes were one of the best parts of it. Right. And it takes place in Napoleonic Europe. And the writing style is sort of, I heard it described somewhere as Jane Austen meets Charles Dickens. But the concept is two English dudes who just rediscover English magic. So there's magicians, there's fairies, there's all sorts of stuff. There's footnotes addressing old made-up fairy stories. It's so good. And it's so original. And then she went 16 years without publishing anything. She had a very long illness. She was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, had all this other stuff. So 16 years in between publishing. She comes out with Piranesi. It's completely different from Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but it also defies genre categories. It defies easy explanation, but it is absolutely wonderful. There's not a whole lot of plot summary I can give that wouldn't spoil it, because one of the pleasures of this book is the uncovering information, that's the slow buildup of information throughout it. But I can tell you in brief, the plot is there's this dude called Piranesi. He's named after this 18th century Italian artist who liked to draw complex, imaginary prisons.
Oh.
Do a Google image search. It's worth it. It's really cool.
Is Piranesi real?
Oh, he was a real dude. Yes.
I don't trust her anymore after reading Jonathan Strange Mr. Norrell.
So this one's a real footnote.
Okay.
So that there's this house that this dude Piranesi lives in, and the house presumably is infinitely large and extends forever. There's nothing beyond the house.
Okay.
The bottom floor of the house is all ocean. So there's fish in it. There's seaweed that washes up in the lower levels. The upper levels are clouds, so there's like storms and rain and lightning. And the in-between levels are all room upon room, hall after hall, filled with statues of everything imaginable. And to Piranesi, this is the entire cosmos. He has no memory of anything else outside of it. There's only one other living human being that he's aware of. And that's such a weird premise. And I remember reading it and talking Danielle into reading the book, and she was telling me after the first few pages, like, what's going on? I was like, just go with it. Like, sink into it, marinate in it a while, and it'll all make sense. Like, I finally started rereading it in preparation for this podcast, and rereading it was just like, oh, it's even better this time. I can just sort of relax in it, just sort of go with it, because one of the things, there's lots of stuff about this book that's great, but one of the things that I think is particularly great is the mind of seeing the world through the eyes of Piranesi, because Piranesi is the narrator. The novel is ostensibly told through Piranesi's journals, and he's a character that has such a contradictory worldview to how so many of us live our lives in this time, in this place that we all live in, because he sees himself as the beloved child of the house, and he sees himself as all part of some web of creation as part of the house. He views himself as sort of the guardian of some of it, the curator. It's his job to learn as much as he can about the house, and just seeing that sort of, it's almost this unfallen worldview. It's almost like seeing Eden through the eyes of Adam in some ways, and it's so fascinating. And then in addition, her mastery of plot, her mastery of story, you can see where C.S. Lewis is a very obvious influence for her. Lots of other things that are interesting about it, but that is the main thing that got me. So yes, Piranesi is my choice.
It's interesting that he is an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
And I don't know, I can't name quickly like a recent, really interesting, unreliable narrator as interesting as he is. So
No, absolutely. Like the narrative device that she used is so interesting, because there is like this unfallen like purity to him.
Yeah,
but mixed in that is the fact that he's unreliable. But it's not unreliable because of any like character defect. It's you forget things in the house, as is mentioned very early on in the book, and that is just a whole. Yeah, it's a layer of complication about your relationship to the house, and also it just makes, if nothing else, it's a story that propels you forward to figure out what is going on. And as the answers keep coming, it's more satisfying. So it works on, sort of this fancy literary level, looking at like viewpoint and worldview of the narrator, and it also works on just like, hey, it's a good story, and there's kind of this mystery, and you need to figure out what's going on as you go.
So you said it's ostensibly written as his journal entries. Is it purely his journal entries, or is there, like, how do you discover that he's an unreliable narrator?
I think I'd have to reread it to be sure. I'm pretty sure it's completely his journals.
It's pretty obvious.
Oh, okay.
I mean, would you say pretty quickly, but like Matt said, not because you don't trust him, or you think that he's, evil.
Yeah, he's not lying. He's not misleading you.
He's not lying. You just know you're missing something.
His perception
and,
is...
there's like little hints here and there. I think you mentioned the other. I'm sorry. You know, as soon as you see them and have an encounter, there's something you don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
My
And
goodness, I want to read that.
And something else with and this wouldn't be spoiling it either. I want to be very careful not to spoil it because,
I know.
learning this is so great. But the other is the opposite of Piranesi, where we don't know anything about the other at first, except they meet every Tuesday and Friday to discuss some secret plan that the other has. And they view the house completely differently. Like Piranesi, like I said, he views himself as the beloved child of the house. He's the keeper of it. He's dependent on it. He says his goal is to learn as much about the house as he can before he dies. So he views himself as he's part of the web of the house. Whereas the other views the house from this sort of detached, more rational, his viewpoint is one we can identify with more easily as modern people, where he wants to find something in the house and use it for his own ends. And he's there's this distance between him and the house. And just seeing them interact with each other is so interesting. It's interesting at the beginning when you don't know what the heck's going on. It's interesting as more the story unravels too.
Oh, delightful.
Yes. I heard it described, some interview or whatever. No, I'm not going to say that because it would be too much of a spoiler. Okay.
An interview spoiled a book? Imagine.
It's
It's
funny
never
how
happened
we've
before.
all picked stories that were like, oh, but I
And
can't
I
tell
can't
you that.
tell you.
But I can't tell you that. It's
I have a question that will not be a spoiler. Something I loved about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Narelle, she just wrote such great male characters. And then when she wrote a female character, it was really good, but it's mostly a story between male characters. And I thought that was a really bold choice by a woman in her first novel. So it sounds like both of these characters are male. Can you describe them to us? Because her male characters are so... What I love is that she writes these male characters that are so different from each other, at least in Jonathan Strange, Mr. Narelle. So can you tell us some of their personality characteristics or anything like that without spoiling it?
Yeah, that's a good point because some authors don't do that very well,
No,
right? Because
most don't.
I remember reading one book. It was this I've already badmouthed her on this pod before, Tana French, and so she writes detective novels. And the protagonist of one of her books was a male, and I just remember thinking, I read this in a review, I was like, yeah, she doesn't have a good male voice. I also think of that Jerry Seinfeld line in Seinfeld when they're trying to write the fake Elaine lines, like, what do women say?
We don't know. We weren't listening.
It's not a given that she'll be able to write effectively for the other gender, and she absolutely does. I think you're right about that. Are we going with Narelle or Narelle?
I say Narelle, but I don't
I was going with Narelle. I could be
Okay.
wrong.
I don't know.
Okay.
Good.
I have no opinion. I'm Swiss.
I'm not the
Okay.
expert on this.
Well, we'll leave that to each their own. then.
avec je ne sais
Je ne sais pas.
I don't know. In French, everything looks weird.
Anyway,
Just throw out half the letters.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be fine.
but you're right. They were really effective male leads in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Narelle. In this one, for huge swaths of the book, there's only Piranesi. And I think they do I think she does a good job of doing that. It certainly never struck me as discordant. And also part of it is this innocence that he has. So that's another factor that plays in. I think that's what really stuck out to me is her able to portray this sort of mind made innocent by the house. So it just seeing the world through his eyes, I think is just really interesting.
And he's very nurturing.
Yes.
And the other is brusque and harsh. And it's just sad to see the way Piranesi thinks of the other. And to see that obviously it's not reciprocated.
Yeah, and to see that, because again, Piranesi's journals are our only lens through the story. So all of us, as jaded moderns, we know exactly what the other's up to right away. Like we get his agenda, we get who he is, we identify with him. We can't identify with Piranesi. We're rooting for Piranesi very early on. We can see what's going on. It's like, but it's sort of this odd thing where the guy who's clearly has this sort of not great agenda is the one we can identify with.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and this sort of alien thing is the voice of goodness in the book.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to read this.
It's so good.
Wow.
Are you looking at
I
Piranesi
was
illustrations?
looking at Piranesi, and then I just found out I am not an audiobook person because I'm just not an audio auditory person. But I just saw that the audio of Pier is read by Chiwetel Ejiofor. Oh, the guy from Amistad.
Yes, a lovely
So
voice.
that would be a lovely voice, especially because if it's Piranesi's journals, then
he would be the voice of him then.
Oh.
Yeah, so let me tell you from the opposite side of the coin there, Mandy.
Yes. I
almost exclusively read for audiobooks.
Right.
I only read iBooks if I have to.
iBooks.
Yeah, just so uncivilized.
I used to think, ironically, that I wouldn't be able to listen to podcasts, but I found that I can listen to podcasts if they're conversational. But I lose track and I don't notice that I'm not listening if it's an audiobook or a lecture in absentia or whatever. If I can't see the person that's talking or if they're not having a conversation. So I would love it if I could do audiobooks. I'm not prejudiced against them.
Take a stand.
I'm taking
Denounce
a stand.
them.
No, like I just know that after a few minutes I would be thinking, wait, what happened? And then I wouldn't know how to get back to where I was. So, but also I love iBooks, as you say. I like the tactile.
Well, for whatever reason, when Piranesi first came out, it wasn't available yet on audiobook, so I read the iBook of
Wow.
it. Made an exception to my rule. That's how eager I was to read it.
Well, you should listen to it.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm rereading it with my eyes. That's how much I love this book.
Well, you should listen because
I want to.
that actor's fantastic.
I want to.
He'd be great.
But yeah, Piranesi. Check it out. This one is Danielle approved. Like Evangeline in Chains. So
Now, does Danielle do iBooks or earbooks?
she does both.
Okay.
Hers is more close to even than me, but she does do a lot of eye and ear.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So
I heard like foot and mouth. Sorry.
Says mother of small children.
Sorry. I'll just hang out here.
all right, Mandy.
Yes.
On to you. What is your selection?
Mine, it's funny. I was looking at the books that I read last year, and I read not as many as I would have liked because, COVID stuff. But I did not like a lot of the books that I read last year. Now I'm sad for myself. And so I need to make sure that this year, if I don't like a book, it's very hard to set aside a book.
Okay, so this is an important thing because Danielle used to have this thing. If she started a book, she would finish it even if she hated it.
Yes.
As a typical millennial, if I'm not instantly gratified, I dispose of it, right?
Well, I am very
But so
generous.
I pull the plug if I don't like a book.
I believe we have had this conversation on the pod before
Yes.
because I discussed the book that I read that I threw across the room.
That's right. Live like you were dying.
Yes, thank you for remembering. I won the book as a package for a short story contest from a publisher, and they sent me a bunch of their terrible books. And the first, I don't know why I started with that one, probably because it was the shortest, but it was a book that... Yeah.
2.7. Okay.
Yeah,
Anyway.
basically. It
is
was a
happening
book
right
that
now?
the publisher
You
had...
make those faces at me all the time when we record remotely. I just don't see them, Evangeline.
Yes, she does. No, it was a book that the publisher asked an author to write based on the Tim McGraw song "Live Like You Were Dying."
No,
So I got to page 14.
No.
I said a few choice words and threw it across the room because please
Well done.
remember, not only was this book horrible, but this book was published by the people who had just said that I could write.
I'm unpleased.
Thank you.
Unsubscribe.
We are displeased.
That was bad. So I was like, these are the people who said they like my short story. They know nothing. I'm a fraud. Anyway.
No.
But there were two books that I enjoyed and that had an impact on me last year. And I am choosing the odder of the two.
Okay.
Good.
But neither of them were written in 2020 or anywhere thereabouts. So this is Sing Unburied Sing by Jasmine Ward, and it was written in 2007, I think.
Okay.
So it is sort of a road novel because they're going on the road, but it's also magical realism because some of the characters, this isn't a spoiler because you learn it fairly quickly. Some of the characters can see their dearly departed and interact with them.
They see dead people.
They see
In
dead
other
people.
words.
They see dead people. Yes,
I was
they
going to
do.
make that joke because she was like, some of the characters can see, and that's actually what it was.
That is what it was. That is exactly what it is. So some of the characters can see dead people. One of the characters tries to stay high so she won't see the dead people. So it's sort of a ghost story, magical realism, road story, historical fiction, everything. So the premise basically is a young boy. Although there are multiple narrators, it still really does center on the young boy whose mother is a mess. She's the one drugging herself so she can't see dead people. And his black mother is a mess. His white father is in prison at Parchman. And if you know anything about Parchman prison,
Not
I
bad.
don't.
Bad.
it's really bad. They actually, I think they stopped this practice, but until fairly recently, they were still using prisoners to harvest crops on the prison property, if that might ring a bell. Anyway, and small, guess what the large racial makeup is of Parchman prison. So anyway, at the beginning of the novel, the dad calls that he's getting out of jail. So for the young boy, this should be good news. His dad's getting out of jail, but the young boy thinks of his grandfather, his mother's father, as his father, and his grandmother as his mother. And so to him, this is not good news. And so the majority of the novel is the journey to Parchman. So it's this young boy with his mother, who he doesn't even call mom. He calls her Lorraine, if that's her name. He calls her by whatever her name is. I just don't remember right now. And his grandfather. It switches narrators. So you do, like I said, you are in the mother's head for a little while. I think you're only in the boys, the grandfathers, and the mothers, if I remember correctly. And it's one of those books that, there are, I hate the word flashback because it's sort of a cringy word, but their context is filled in when you learn, like, why does he have such a hard time with his mother? You learn. But I think the thing that was one of the things that's so compelling to me is a lot of authors, first of all, don't do multiple narrators well. But when they work, the reason they work to me is because we as a reader can see all the gaps between what we hear from one another and what is actually being said and what's behind it. And it's just, as a reader, I just found myself wanting to jump in to the pages and be like, no, you don't understand. You guys have so much more in common than you think, and you want the same things, and and so there's that pull and that draw of compassion toward every character, even the ones, because obviously you start in one person's head, so you have their perception about the other character, and then you're in the other character's head and you're like, oh, but why won't she tell him that that's why she feels that way? That kind of thing. And then it's a book where you don't expect there to be a twist, and then there is. So I guess that's a spoiler.
Bruce Willis was dead the
I just
whole
spoiled
time.
you.
Some people haven't seen that movie.
It's a little more recent than Sugaway the Green Knight.
Yeah, in Die Hard, he was dead the whole time. That was the twist of Die Hard. It's Die Hard. That was, yeah. Anyway, he just said Bruce Willis. There's a lot of Bruce Willis movies. Anyway, but the way that she uses I don't even like to say she uses, because that sort of implies it's a device. It doesn't feel devicey. But the title, Sing, Unburied, Sing. I remember a lot of times when a title is unique like that, that's in the back of my mind as I'm reading. I'm like, okay, what's the title going to mean? And it took me a while to figure it out, but obviously it's those who feel buried and have no voices need to be given voices, whether they're the live ones or the ghosts. We need to be able to hear their voices. We need to unbury them and let them sing. And so it's a book that I want to loan out a bunch. I want to read it again. Yes, Evangeline, go ahead. She just took it. So it was very impactful. And obviously I had heard of Jasmine Ward over and over, and I hadn't read anything by her. And I just picked this to start with, and I definitely want to read more by her. So
was going to ask about the ghosts, and
Yeah.
because ghosts always, most of the time represent unfinished business. So I like
Yes.
that concept of allowing the dead to sing.
Oh,
so
for
that they
yes,
can
absolutely.
finish what
Right.
they-
And the fact that the mother keeps drugging herself to not hear the ghost is
Yeah. Well,
very important.
I think I might be tempted.
Yeah,
as well.
right.
Right. To be
Well, and there's
There you go.
reason. Right.
You know, I mean, you get it,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
I get it. Yeah.
I think the ghosts that are seen for the most part are people that they knew, that the characters knew. But in one case, it's not. And so that is really interesting because I, as the reader, had to figure out who the child was seeing at the same time that he was.
So can everyone
yeah.
see ghosts, or only some
No.
people can?
Only it's like and
I don't
that's
know
how,
that. Can
So
you?
this sounds like real life.
that's how it's kind of magical realism because it's
Like Mandy can see ghosts, but Peter can't. So that's
pretty much. And they don't talk about it like those who can see the ghosts. Well, I don't think the child realizes. I think the child comes to realize, oh, nobody else can see this person who's talking to me right now. The mother knows. She knows no one else can see it, whatever. But it's not discussed, so it's sort of, but it's also never explained. So that's why I would define it as magical realism, too, because it's just sort of this thing
It's
that a
just
couple
there.
people, they can do it, and
I really admire that narrative approach because it cuts against every single instinct that I have.
Oh, yeah.
When I have
You
like
want to explain.
any sort of device or some
Right.
sort of other
Yeah.
world, I want to explain it entirely.
yeah, nope.
But I know objectively the better approach is just
Drop it in there.
drop it in there and
Yeah.
let the reader figure it out as it goes.
No, it's never
Yeah.
explained how or
Yeah.
why.
That's kind of cool.
I kind of love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be the opposite. Must be the outliner versus
Yeah,
the.
yeah, exactly.
Always.
I have a
Salt in the
document. I have a
wind.
document where I write down all the rules.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not gonna not put it in somewhere.
So in the title, are there
Yes.
commas?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
Sing, comma, unburied, comma,
Okay.
sing.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Visuals.
Yes, on the
Thank you.
the cover there are commas.
Sorry, that's
Yes.
such a poet question.
No.
We're all word people here.
I was hoping that I was saying it in a way that you heard the
I
commas.
was pretty
so I
sure there were
apologize.
commas. I just wanted to make
Unburied, sing.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
There used to be a
Exactly.
semicolon in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Or an M dash.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah,
So
the
sexy.
difference.
Okay,
I
Stop it.
overdo the M dashes.
can I tell you a true story? I
Yes.
uncovered a manuscript I wrote a couple years ago, kind of discarded, and I was like, hey, I should dust this off. This could be useful for something. Literally about every 30 seconds, my comment to myself was, gosh, I use a lot of M dashes. Then like next paragraph was like, gosh, another M dash.
There's an app where you can put in a block of your text and it removes all the letters and it just leaves you your
It'd just be
your
a line of M dashes.
punctuation. It's actually really cool to do it with
awesome.
and compare like Faulkner and Hemingway and just see like differences in punctuation. I don't
Well,
remember what the
Faulkner
app
just
is
used
called.
period, and that was it.
But it's so interesting. It's so because you see
That's
just
cool.
like lines of periods, and then with Hemingway you'll see comma, 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 comma,
Yeah.
comma, period.
Well, now I'm
It's
looking.
very interesting. I don't know what the app is
It
called.
does sound like fun.
Okay, she's.
You're a bunch of nerds.
I do
here.
not
are.
see.
We
I
are.
do not see M dashes in Jasmine words.
Well, then I don't
want to
read
of
it.
commas. There.
gonna be at least
I will
some.
say, I just remembered this. I don't know about y'all, but after a while, I get a little irritated if there are large blocks of italics.
Yeah, true.
There are some sections with large blocks of italics, but you figure it's necessary.
Okay.
So just sink in, buckle your seatbelt, deal with the italics.
It's funny that you're going home with my copy of Pier.
It's really true.
I am going home with Mandy's copy of Sing Unburied Sing.
But y'all didn't bring any copies of anything.
I
for
did.
me.
I did.
You
I
did?
just didn't bring the Green Knight, but I brought books.
Awesome.
There you go.
Woohoo.
My copy of Piranesi's on my phone.
Oh, stop it.
Now,
Nope.
no.
I did not.
If it's gonna be an iBook, it has to also be a turn the page book, like the paper cut style page.
So it is only audio or physical book. There is no. We're not acknowledging
Never the
at all
twain
that there
shall
is
meet.
some
Not me.
Sort of
No.
Not unless we want to
electronic.
contribute to the collapse of civilization.
All right.
Well, in that case, I'll just stealthily put my phone away as I thank everyone for the book/movie recommendations, and hopefully, listeners, good, sneak preview of some of the stuff we want to discuss going forward at these roundtables, just at different aspects of story, and this can take a whole lot of permutations. I'm not exactly sure what direction it's going to take yet, but it'll be super fun.
You're not going to outline it?
Oh my gosh.
I want to. How do you know I didn't? But anyway, as y'all can probably tell, things are winding down here at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. You've polished off your final glass, the customers are trundling home, and you're stealthily putting away your phone so that Jane and Mandy can't see you've been reading a book there. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. To find out more about Anselm Society, once again, visit us at anselmsociety.org. I'm Matthew Mellema. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.